Tension is rising between Algeria and Libya's National Transitional Council. Gaddafi's family members were given refuge in Algeria, and Libya wants them back. This comes a day after al-Qaeda claimed responsibility for blowing up an Algerian military academy to punish, they say, the country for supporting Gaddafi's regime. So what is going on between Algeria and Libya, and how significant is the role of al-Qaeda in stoking friction between the two neighbours? This is Inside Story. Hello, warm welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. As the fate of 4 of Gaddafi's family members is decided, tension continues to rise between Libya's new leadership and Algeria. It's not been helped by claims that al-Qaeda is responsible for the recent twin suicide attacks in Algeria for supporting Gaddafi. Now, let me give you the details. 2 suicide bombers blew themselves up near the building of the military academy in the town of Churchill, around 100 kilometres west of the capital, Algiers, killing 18 people. In a statement titled "A Gift for Eid," the group has claimed that the target of the attack was an important symbol of the Algerian regime, which is accused of supporting former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. Now, the al-Qaeda and Islamic Maghreb inspired attacks and accusations that the Algerian government is close to Gaddafi comes after a testy period between the two countries. Throughout the 6-month uprising, opposition officials have accused Algiers of providing mercenaries to repress the revolt, and more recently accused Algeria of an act of aggression for admitting the wife of Muammar Gaddafi and 3 of his children. The NTC said it would seek to extradite them to be tried before Libyan courts, but now the NTC believes Algeria will pass them on to another country. Meanwhile, Algeria has yet to recognise the rebels' National Transitional Council, despite the fall of Gaddafi. Algeria has said it first wants a strong commitment from the NTC to fight al-Qaeda in the region. Joining us today to discuss this further are our guests in London, Saad Jabbar. He's an international lawyer of Algerian origin. In Boston, Khalid Lam, a North Africa affairs analyst. And in Rabat, Mustafa El Khalfi. He is the director of the Moroccan Centre for Contemporary Research and Studies. Welcome, gentlemen. Mr. Jabbar, why would the family go to Algeria? Why would Algeria accept Gaddafi's family?
Well, the Algerian regime is not that different to Gaddafi's, except that in Libya, you know, Gaddafi is in charge, whereas in Algeria it's a totalitarian regime led by several generals and heads of the military intelligence and related bureaucrats who work under them. And the Algerian regime themselves have been targeted to, for spring uprising, and they did not want to see democracy in Tunisia, in Egypt, or in Libya. The Algerians used to say, we are better than Tunisia, so shut up. We are better than Libya. We are better than Morocco. Now Morocco accepted to open up, according to the king. He wanted to become constitutional monarchy. Therefore, there is an strategic interest of the Algerian regime not to allow democracy to thrive in its neighboring countries. And secondly, some leading elements within the regime itself have been making a lot of money from smuggling goods and ammunition and weapons to the Gaddafi regime. And I wouldn't put so much... So is
this a statement from Algeria that, look, we still support the Gaddafi family, we still support the Gaddafi regime, and we don't approve what's happening on our doorstep?
No. There is a support of one totalitarian regime to another, because Algeria has the Algerian regime. I would like to stress saying the Algerian generals and the regime rather than the people. The people in Algeria are supporting the right of self-determination and freedom for the Libyan people. Make no mistake about this. And as far as the family is concerned, we have our own traditions. I mean, when a family comes to you, especially 2 women and 3 children who are known not to be involved militarily in the fight, even if Aisha made some statements, but it shouldn't look as if it's spontaneous. The Algerian regime have provided the support, the planning, and so on to take this family out. I, as a lawyer and support human rights, I would never turn any people back to where they might be, meeting a harsh punishment or
okay,
inhuman and degrading
let me pick up
treatment.
that point, humanitarian rights, because this has been cited as a humanitarian issue. Do you buy that, Mr. Al-Khalfi?
No, I think based on what your guests in London said, the nature of the regime in Algeria tell us that we should expect that the Algerian regime is going to support al-Gaddafi family and is going to refuse to recognize the new regime in Libya, because now the regime in Algeria is in a difficult position. It's alone as a dictator regime refusing to wage real democratic reforms in the country. So what happened with the recent bombing with al-Qaeda, that the regime is trying to use al-Qaeda as an excuse to stop any demands for democratic reform in Algeria, and also is trying to use the al-Qaeda threat in the Maghreb as an element in his discourse against the new Libyan regime. All this thing we should put it within a geostrategic analysis. Now Algeria is losing his ally in Libya. A new democracy now is emerging in Tunisia. The same thing in Morocco and at some point in Mauritania. So Algeria is in a difficult position, is trying to use these recent attacks to make an excuse that no way to have a real democratic reform in Algeria. So this is the first point. The second point, what we should expect from the Bouteflika's regime, taken into account that the changes that happened in Libya will have a positive impact on the Western Sahara conflict, taken into account that Morocco has supported the revolution in Libya against the foreign policy of Algeria. So Morocco now is waiting that the Libyan will change their policy to support their approach in resolving the Western Sahara conflict. So Algeria is losing in two fronts. The first is in preventing any real pressure toward democracy, and secondly, in the Western Sahara conflict in the other side. So the future for the Algerian regime is so bad and is so black. Now, without having a real emergence of a democratic force in Algeria, I think Algeria will be the last country that will be a democratic country.
Okay, Mr. Lam, let's talk about this growing friction between Libya and Algeria. Our two guests there heightened a few of the issues. What do you think is behind it? I mean, it can't just be that Muammar Gaddafi's family has been housed there, certainly for the interim.
I think the Algerians are in a position where they bet wrong on Libya. They expected Gaddafi to survive the uprising in his country. They took the African Union position on Libya, which was to oppose intervention, to oppose the internationalization of the conflict, largely for internal reasons. And in the process of doing that and to justify their position, they embarked on what seems to be a very aggressive propaganda campaign, which put them in conflict with the TNC. The TNC, of course, represents something for the Algerian regime which is quite negative, which is a model of change that the Algerians fear very much, given their own experience in the 1990s with their civil war, which would have turned out probably differently if there had been external intervention. And the Algerians, I think, employed an improper analysis of the situation, regionally and internationally. And now they're in a position where they are having to deal with those consequences. And I agree with both of your guests. Algeria has ended this conflict more isolated than previously, and it's likely that the Algerians are trying to build internal cohesiveness around accusations and criticisms that are likely to come at them
because they were certainly accused of
the newly free Libya.
Of arming some of the fighters. Do you think that that'll backfire now?
I think in terms of internally, maybe. I don't think that we can say definitively just yet. I mean, the Algerian press has been pretty aggressive in accusing the TNC of facilitating the movement of weapons out into Algeria, into the Sahel, and arming and assisting, if inadvertently, in the arming of al-Qaeda. That argument is bolstered by recent attacks internally, I think. Externally, certainly, it looks quite suspicious to a disinterested observer that the Algerians would make these accusations and that al-Qaeda would be able to attack, generally speaking, a very secure facility in Shershel, like the academy, and then, coincidentally accuse them of supporting Gaddafi as well, even though the Algerian regime has denied supporting Gaddafi categorically, repeatedly. So, I mean, the situation to me looks like the Algerians have been trying to spin for several months this internal narrative about the TNC, about the crisis in Libya, as a way of bolstering their own credibility, as Dr. Khalfi said earlier. And,
okay, let me pop that to
I think what will happen
Mr.
is that you'll
Jabbar,
see
excuse
more
me
criticism.
interrupting there. I mean, does Algeria have a point when they question the credibility of the NTC?
I think it's the biggest joke I've ever heard in recent politics in Algeria.
Is that a
you
yes?
have the United States, they have the United States, the UK, France, Italy, who are the biggest enemies of al-Qaeda, and the Algerians or the Algerian regime were the only people who discovered that the ally of these countries, which is the rebels, are supporting al-Qaeda. I would like to put a big question mark about al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda, remember, the Islamist groups which were created in Algeria ended up infiltrated, or maybe they were set up by the regime itself in order to frighten off the outside world. And al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, I still put a big question mark. How come al-Qaeda hits only when it suits the regime? I would like to come back to one thing. I think the most important thing here is not whether the family of Gaddafi has moved to Algeria. I would like any person, any human being to be protected, not to be persecuted for any reason. But I think it would be more of, for the interest of the Libyan people and the new emerging democracy in Libya if we know Gaddafi, where Gaddafi is. And I hope that we will give as many exit means to Gaddafi and his lot to go to any country which we would know where they are, like in Algeria. Therefore, you could confine him, neutralize him, and keep him in his own cage in order not to create any problems or to sponsor some violent acts or terrorist acts in Libya after his collapse.
Because that's a real concern, isn't it? That, I mean, there are all these... the country's basically awash with weapons. We know that some of the mustard gas, some of the nuclear weapons that were in Gaddafi's hands, those have gone missing.
Not nuclear,
that's going to be a problem.
No, not nuclear. No, not nuclear. Believe me, I was on the Libyan side when we were negotiating all sorts of Lockerbie and the aftermath. And yes, Gaddafi was left with some mustard gas, some chemical weapons, but not nuclear weapons.
You're correct, mustard gas.
Let me stress one thing. You know, I said Gaddafi will be more controlled if he is in a country like Algeria. Therefore, the United States, the Western world, and the big major countries could force the Algerian authorities to confine Gaddafi, to restrict his activities, rather than if he's at large or made to look as he was at large. I would question that he is still in Libya myself.
Mr. Al-Khalfi, what do you make of that?
I think that there is a problem in examining the real situation and of the al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. The al-Qaeda now is in decline. The Arab Democratic Spring has presented an alternative to the followers of the al-Qaeda, to the jihadist movement, to the Salafists. There is a new reality now is emerging in the Arab world, that al-Qaeda is no longer the alternative of change. There is another thing, is the democratic, peaceful methods of change. Even the jihadist groups in Libya, they transformed their views toward taking into account the democratic process and participating in this. This is an element. The second thing that is also very important, Algeria has a problem with Libya. There is almost 1,200 kilometers, the borders between Algeria and Libya. And the recent bombing in Algeria of al-Qaeda is an excuse for Algeria to say, we have a problem, that al-Qaeda now is emerging in Libya, so we should close the border. And this is what happened. The issue of hosting the Gaddafi family, I think, is in reality is an excuse to emphasize this and to justify this new policy toward Libya. Also, there is another thing, that al-Qaeda now in the Maghreb, in reality is an Algerian problem. Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb emerged in late 2006, beginning 2007. And they tried to widen their activities in Morocco, Mauritania, but they didn't succeed. They failed. With only a few operations happened in the northeast of Mauritania and in the north of Mali. So the reality now, al-Qaeda is mainly an Algerian problem. The regime is using al-Qaeda to prevent any democratization in the country. And also Algeria, by this policy, is trying to isolate itself from the democratic movement. Okay, let me put that to
Mr. Lum. Do you think that al-Qaeda really is just an Algerian problem? I mean, there are so many al-Qaeda fighters within Libya. This was exposed in WikiLeaks cables dating from 2008. The de facto commander of the rebels in Tripoli, Abdelhakim Belhaj, also talks about jihadists who fought alongside allied troops in Iraq who are now in Libya.
I think that's a very important point, and I don't agree that al-Qaeda in the Maghreb is just an Algerian problem. We have instances earlier this summer in Tunisia of al-Qaeda linked individuals being captured by the Tunisian armed forces, and the Mauritanian question is actually quite serious. There's a large number of the brigades of AQIM in the Sahel being recruiting from Mauritania in large numbers over the last several years. While I would agree with Dr. Khalfi that as far as Morocco is concerned, or as far as perhaps even Libya, AQIM is not a serious issue, but the issue isn't so much a political threat. I don't view AQIM as a political threat to any of the regimes in the region. It's a security threat, and the fact that you do have weapons that have been identified as having come from Libyan stocks that were found in Mauritania, northern Mali this past summer during a confrontation between Mauritanian forces and al-Qaeda, I think points to a real issue in the region. However, I do think that the Algerians have greatly exaggerated the extent to which al-Qaeda poses a real threat to national security. Although, I mean, like I said earlier, there has been an uptick in attacks in the country in magnitude and sophistication in the last 2 months. Your other guests have explained what alternative ideas about why that's been. But I do think that al-Qaeda in North Africa is an opportunistic organization. It's heavily criminal. It's not highly ideological. It's looking for any opportunity to make itself relevant. And if you look at their communiques about Tunisia or about Libya, they've tried to say that this vindicates their vision and so on. They've been pretty much ignored by the TNC.
But doesn't it vindicate their vision? And I'm going to throw that to Mr. Jabbar. Excuse me interrupting. Mr. Jabbar, doesn't this vindicate al-Qaeda's vision, because more people have been killed in Libya? Aren't they using this to counter the Arab Spring and go, look, we've liberated Libya, there's more blood spread, that's the way we go?
You are assuming that al-Qaeda exists, as it was suggested, with due respect to my Moroccan colleague. I understand the manipulations and the tricks of, by the way, all the regimes in the region, including Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and others. We don't know who write these communiques for al-Qaeda, whether al-Qaeda exists or not. But I remember from the civil war in Algeria how some Islamist groups, supposedly anti-regime, and their leaders ended up amnestied, and they are alive today, and they are allied with the regime. There is the infiltration, the creation of, encourage some youth to go to the mountains, then manipulate them, move them whenever, or use them whenever you want. So I would like to leave a big question mark on the threat of al-Qaeda, al-Qaeda's existence, and the support of the existing regimes. Look at Gaddafi, what he said. Look at Mubarak, Mubarak what he said. Look at Ben Ali what he said. Everybody tried to play the card of the Islamists. I think we are living in a post-Islamist era and the post-Islamist threat. We are living
we had the Libyan former
coalitions.
ambassador to the United Nations tell us here on Al Jazeera that the one thing he's frightened of is the Islamic extremists. He said that is the main problem.
I'm sorry, but Shalgam, the ex-foreign minister of Libya who resigned and condemned Gaddafi, Abdurrahman Shalgam, foreign minister, whom I know very well, he mentioned also how Gaddafi manipulated the fear and tried to exploit the fear of Islamism and extremism, whereas he was arming the Tuareg. He wanted to create a state for Tuareg which would have taken 500,000 square kilometers from Algeria, and the borders which he disputes with Algeria, he could take between 35,000 to 50,000 square kilometers. So I think there is the exploitation, the manipulation, and the misuse of the fear called al-Qaeda. I think now we live in an era of coalitions. The people who liberated Tunisia from dictatorship, or Egypt, or Libya now, are coalition of forces. There is no one force which could manipulate or monopolize authority or power in the future. It is going to be like after the Second World War, when the fascism and Nazism fell. And then, since then, we have in Italy, in Germany, and in other countries, coalitions, and not the winner takes all.
Okay, let me put that to Mr. Al-Khalfi. Let's talk about Mr. Abdul Hakim Belaj. He's the de facto commander of the rebels in Tripoli. He had suspected links in the past to Taliban, to al-Qaeda. He was tortured for his so-called terrorist acts by the CIA. This is a powerful man in a very powerful position with links to al-Qaeda. I mean, doesn't that say everything?
Yes, Mr. Abdul Hakim Belhaj, in late 2009, 2010, he led the many changes in the ideology of al-Qaeda in Libya. They changed their views and their attitudes from having militant, violent approach against the system and the society toward having a civic, democratic, at some point, approach. This change has happened before the ongoing democratic spring. We should take this into account, that the jihadist movement in Libya has been transformed from a violent stand toward a peaceful democratic stand. This is an element. And this what helped in creating the coalition between people and individuals and groups in Benghazi from different sides, Salafist, Islamist, Muslim Brotherhood, and even they changed their name in last March. They used to have as a name the Libyan Islamic Combatant Group, Jama'a al-Libya al-Muqatila. Now they have a new name, the Islamic Movement for Change. And this new name has reflected the change in their ideology, their political platform, and this has helped in creating, as I said, the coalition. This is an element. The second thing, that al-Qaeda in the Maghreb has many tension with the Libyan group, with the jihadists in Libya. And these tensions has undermined any possible cooperation in the past, even when al-Qaeda in the Maghreb joined the international network of al-Qaeda, even when the Dawahiri said that al-Qaeda in the Maghreb is a part of us. The Libyans kept their independency, and they changed their views in 2009, 2010, and now in 2011 they are part of the Arab Democratic Spring.
Okay.
The third point.
Briefly,
yes,
okay, let me just pop this question to Mr. Lum, because I think we're going to run out of time, Sadi. Where do you think all of this information that we've discussed, the fear of al-Qaeda, the presence of al-Qaeda or not, leaves the international community and their relationship with Algeria and Libya?
Well, I think the Algerians have evolved pretty close cooperation with the Western countries on counterterrorism issues in the last decade. With NATO, with the United States, and so on. I think that the accusations that Algeria has made about the TNC, about the risk of weapons proliferation, etc., coming out of Libya, I think that these have to be understood basically as a lot of it for domestic consumption, for the Algerians playing to their own internal audience, trying to manipulate public opinion. And early on, I mean, you saw a change in their justifications for their position. They said that at first that there's a risk that weapons in Libya could be transferred to al-Qaeda. Then they said that there were links between the rebels and al-Qaeda. And so that kind of that evolution, to me, basically says that the Algerian position they're not seeking to convert others to that view of the TNC or Libya.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. We're going to have to leave it there. Talking to us from London, Saad Jabbar in Boston, Khalid Lam with those final words in Rabat, Mustafa El-Khalfi. And, of course, thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye.